Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for sticking around for little old me. Actually, I know you're not here to see me. You're here to see my fellow panelists, who are all amazing and wonderful. We're going to talk about living for the city in a second, but before I do that, I'm just making a plug. If you like any of this fine paraphernalia, you can buy it in the back. We got to make money somehow. Anyway, I'm going to get started right now. We've got a great panel, and we're going to be talking about urban and investment in urban technologies and living for the city and what it takes these days. So the first question is for Brad and Shruti. Why did y'all get into the business of co-living? What was it that got y'all started? And Brad, Shruti, if you want to take it first, and then Brad, take a shot at it.
Yeah, definitely. So I moved to the area of the San Francisco Valley in 2014, and I didn't know anyone. I ended up meeting a friend on Craigslist, and we happened to hit it off really well, and we started our first 7-bedroom house. And for us, it took us about a month of setup on evenings and weekends, but it was such a great experience. Some of my friends in the house are still my really good friends to this day. And one of our other friends liked it so much, he actually moved into our garage. So after moving out of there, he's actually a doctor at Stanford, and he was talking to the Stanford director of medical education, and she mentioned to him that housing out in the valley was so expensive and competitive that residents were actually turning down Stanford because it was so pricey. So clearly there was a problem here. We knew shared housing was the obvious solution, so we started HubHaus to address this problem where people don't have a place to live and don't have a community to be a part of.
Was that the same story for you, Brad? You wanted to live with your besties?
Well, when I first moved to New York, actually, 8 years ago, I had to move on very short notice, and I moved in with a roommate I met on Craigslist, and he really is a really good guy, but he loved to cook bacon and smoke weed at 8 o'clock every morning. So that was my first great guy. So I really had a good Craigslist roommate experience. But no, so I didn't go into this saying I'm going to start a co-living company. I went into this realizing there was a big problem with housing, how housing was getting built, how we were thinking about housing supply in urban centers. Before this, I was co-founder of a company called General Assembly, which provides training in tech business and design. And we saw many of not just our students, but our instructors and our employees were struggling to find housing. And I'll give you a good example of why the space is broken. I was talking to a real estate developer the other day about his new buildings and how he could make them better customer experiences. And he stopped me and he said, Brad, I don't build what tenants want. I build what the bank wants. And that mindset is what we started Common to change. And you still have to, unfortunately, build something a bank is willing to tolerate, but you can do that in a much friendlier and more convenient way. And co-living is a great way to solve a big need.
Okay, I hear you on this, but sorry, I'm going to be a jerk because I'm a jerk.
Go for it.
It seems like there are a lot of people who are investing in all sorts of different real estate plays, and I just wonder how it's actually venture investable. Like, what are, and Stonely, I'm hoping you can address this as a venture investor. Like, what the hell makes like a real estate play where you're renting property and dealing with tenants? What makes that venture backable?
Yeah, I mean, first you have to step back and think about what the primary motivation of a venture investor is, which is outsized returns in a relatively short period of time, 5 to 10 years. And so as far as the check marks go, as far as how you size whether something might produce an outsized returns, you look at the size of the market, the size of the industry. Sometimes you forecast how big it could be. But when you look at real estate, you don't have to use your imagination. It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. So there's definitely opportunity to grow a very large company. Even if you're a relatively small player in real estate, it still means that you're potentially doing hundreds of millions of dollars, for example. The second part of the equation, the speed to scale, has traditionally been tougher, right? Because real estate is traditionally thought of as you buy property, you buy a building, you do something that the bank wants on that property and said building, et cetera, and over time you build a large company. But with opportunities that HubHaus, that Common, Star City, and a few of the other more innovative real estate companies, startup real estate companies are approaching, where they're maybe not at first focusing on acquiring inventory. Their primary focus is on acquiring and building experiences, and so they're able to acquire more customers faster. Additionally, they're able to layer additional services into that experience so they can laterally build out the revenue from the same customer base. These are all things that the traditional real estate industry just isn't thinking about, like how to increase the value of this customer that you already have, like most of their life spending on in your product. And so I think with the advances in both technology, the ability to manage properties and to discover opportunities quicker, but additionally the advances in culture, where people are less and less inclined to buy and more inclined to rent for the access to experiences, and so you can move faster.
We'll get into that in a second, whether this cultural thing is actually a thing. But so folks are clearly backing companies like HubHaus and Common. Indeed, they raise money. But what else are people looking at in sort of the urban tech space? When you think about living for the city, what are you looking for as an investor?
Well, so Urban Us, we're a little bit different than most ventures funds, because our motivation is actually around climate. You know, if you look at a pie of what are the things that contribute to climate change, or if you don't like the word climate change, if you think about like a healthy environment where people can breathe without getting sick, they can drink water without getting sick, where they're healthier, those things all live and breathe most prominently in the city, right? And so how you get to and from work, the building that you live in, the building that you work in, the internal environment, how that building was built, the food you eat, the water you drink, etc. All of those things are critical to both how we survive, because if we get these things right, everybody ignores them, right? You just pay your utility bill. When we get them wrong, when the trash doesn't get picked up, or your water poisons your children, then everyone's paying attention. And those are all great reasons to look for founders who are also motivated in solving these problems. But the other great reason is that these aren't small industries, right? We're talking about transportation, built environment, utilities. These are massive, massive industries that also are latent for disruption. They're for the most part, untouched by technology. Efficient government, which is another important factor in having an efficient, safe, and healthy city. So, I mean, it's a greenfield of opportunity, and more generalist investors are recognizing it.
Well, I think those are all very valid points. Now, one of the things you mentioned is the $1 trillion size of the real estate market. That also means that there are companies that are incredibly well capitalized that are in this market already. So Shruti and Brad, what's defensible about what y'all are doing? Like, how do these companies not just say, oh, this is successful, why don't I just come in and roll these guys? Mm-hmm. And they also have access to, they have access to the properties themselves because they're both developing and renting, in some cases, these buildings.
Yeah, so to address this question and kind of to talk a little bit earlier too on why it's venture-backed, you have traditional real estate companies which are super capital intensive, they don't really use tech. Only 56% of property managers use any form of software whatsoever. And then you also have tech companies which move fast but have a harder time getting a lot of money. I think the co-living model, at least our model at HubHaus, strips away the capital intensiveness. It doesn't cost us much to get a house up. And we also put in the tech to make things more efficient. And I think the most defensible piece of it is the community. The HubHaus experience is built around the people, and it's built around the community inside the houses, and that's what makes it special, and that's what makes it different, and that's what makes us almost a new category of company. It's not really real estate or tech.
Brad, was that your assessment as well, or?
Yeah, I mean, I think 2 points. One is that I strongly believe there are network effects in a business like this. Common right now is open in New York, San Francisco, and Washington, D.C. We're going to be open in a couple other cities before the end of the year. We let any person living in Common move seamlessly between any of our homes. So you can sign up for Common in New York and decide to move to San Francisco, DC, eventually many other cities. And I think that kind of flexibility and that ability to not be tethered to a lease, tethered to a city, is both incredibly appealing and also really empowering. The second point, which is not about network effects, but it's just about the industry that all of us are in, And it's one of the reasons that I'm very excited to be an entrepreneur in real estate. Because real estate is the last bastion of family business. Businesses where the patriarch has 2 sons, and the smart one does the acquisitions, and the stupid one does the property management. And that's how a lot of real estate works. And there are very few industries that still work like this. If you went back like 70 years ago, most industries work like this. So if you brought like management talent and skill and technology, you could disrupt the giants. Today, it's like you go into technology, Google is really good at what they do. Facebook is really good at what they do. Amazon, you pick any of these big companies, even the big automakers are very sophisticated at what they do. Real estate, I think, is one of the last industries where someone is running that business just because they're related to the guy who ran it before.
Which Trump is the smart Trump? And which Trump? Yeah. Sorry, no, I kid. You don't have to answer that. Which Kushner is the smart? No, you don't have to answer that one.
Mark Kushner.
Corporate interest. We talk about trillion-dollar markets, and the real estate sort of looking like a business that's really attractive, where corporations are starting to spend money on technology. What other areas or what other things are corporations getting into sort of this urban tech?
Yeah, I think it's step back just a little bit. Again, the relationship between the city and climate is intimate. It's the story of the development of cities is the story of us living in a period of time where climate is stable. The story of all of the industries that we've talked about is also a result of the development of cities, which is, I won't repeat the stats, more people on Earth now live in cities than not. That trend is continuing. And both of those things combined, the instability of climate, which starts to add a whole bunch of questions into the equation of many industries, but also the growing power, economic power of cities, impacts a lot of these industries in ways that they just can't anticipate. This is at the same time that the ball that they're all focusing on is which startup might disrupt their business model. Right? And so a lot of entrenched industries are now seeking to innovate, and they're doing it in a number of different ways. And so one way is that they're working with startups, right, to try to capture the value of what the future of a more urban and more climate and environmentally conscious future might look like. One thing, as an example, that we're announcing today, actually, for the first time live, is in partnership with BMW Mini, we're launching a new cohort of their Urban X Accelerator based in Brooklyn, where the focus is on finding these founders that are deliberately solving problems at the intersection of better cities, healthier environments, giving them $100,000 in 6 months of access to BMW and Mini's engineers and the space, and access to our network of over 1,500 co-investors, advisors, founders, et cetera, to help them really build and scale companies that can redefine and reimagine the cities of the future.
And that, my friends, is what we call breaking news, right? That's what that was. Look at that exclusive partnership with BMW. It's awesome. Congratulations. That's good stuff. Moving back into the co-living space, I wonder how much of this, you talk a little bit about sort of generational, the generational shift. And I wonder how much of that is an actual generational shift, how much of that is driven by a lack of capital available to millennials because they just got screwed in 2008 by the sort of financial crisis and are just now getting out of that. So some of this seems to be like y'all providing solutions that in an ideal world wouldn't exist, right? Like these problems wouldn't happen. You'd have enough housing stock, you'd have available apartments so that people could live on their own and have, a nice life and get their own apartment. If they want to live with someone, they live with someone. Where am I wrong in that? Like, what am I missing? Where am I being a jerk? Brad or Shruti, like either of you can take that and just say, John, you're always being a jerk. But, how much of this is generational demand and how much of it is just like, they're kind of screwed?
So I think there's a piece on both, and just to quickly say, I think people, for some reason, make this assumption that housing should be hard. And then if housing is not difficult, if you're not sitting at home at 11 a.m. on a Tuesday waiting for the Con Ed man to come by and set up your power, that like you're being coddled or you're not an adult. And I don't see why that's the case. I think you've seen technology and good experiences transform a lot of industries. And I think housing is the same thing. I think that kind of convenient experience is something that's pretty universal as a need. And we have co-living, that's our core product. We also have studios, one bedrooms, traditional apartments that we manage as part of the common network.
And Trudy, what do you, go on.
I think that co-living and shared housing is the way our society is moving. I think it's actually a better solution than living alone for people who are between the ages of 22 to 35, who are new to the area, who don't really have that many friends. We have a lot of people who move in originally because the prices are low, but they end up staying for the community long after they're making enough money to live alone. We have people who own Teslas, who are making like $200,000, $300,000 incomes, who are staying in our houses because they love the community. And even when they transfer jobs, they don't transfer and move into their own house. They're moving into another HubHaus because they want to be a part of the HubHaus experience. And if shared housing is done right, and you have somebody who's regulating it, and when you have the HubHaus experience and the infrastructure involved, people really love it, and it's an amazing thing, and it's beautiful.
Yeah, I'll chime in a little bit on that. I was reading an article recently that talked a little bit about Common and a few of the other co-living startups, and there was an awesome quote in there, which is that the refrigerator killed the community, is the end of humanity, something along those lines. And so I love that quote because it's a great example of how technology, really even the most rudimentary technologies, are a double-edged sword. And so the sense of community that we had by going to the grocer more often, by being outside on our front porch because we didn't have AC inside, that sense of connectedness with our community and our neighborhoods just doesn't exist anymore. So everybody's like inside of their boxes and they're going from one box to another. And what I believe the cultural shift that's happening is a reach back towards that sense of community. I think the younger generations are realizing that owning more stuff didn't lead to more happiness. Their parents aren't happier because they had more stuff or more space. But being connected to people, especially now that you have the tease of having social media making you feel connected, but not really, I think people are drawn towards opportunities to live and work close to people that they like, and they're willing to sacrifice ownership.
So what you're saying is the problem is with me because my basic philosophy is hell is other people. That's what you're telling me. That's what you're talking. I understand. But at what point does the notion of housing itself become obsolete if we have autonomous vehicles that will drive us anywhere we want to go? We can live and work from these cars. We can sit around and have VR headsets strapped to our faces and just live in a virtual life like Wall-E. Hashtag van life. When does that happen?
I don't think that's actually a better way to live. I think technology, while it has made huge progress in connecting us, it also disconnects us in a lot of ways. And I think shared housing is a great way to put us back in touch with people. At our houses, people are eating dinner together. They're spending a lot of time together. They're going out together. This past weekend, we had a bunch of people from a bunch of our members go to Vegas together. It's a way to bring people back together, reconnect them, while providing a great experience.
John, remember like the mid-90s when everyone was like video conferencing is going to mean cities are over? And then the opposite happened.
Right.
And I kind of like, I think the death of the city from autonomous vehicles is really overrated. That people want to be near other people, and I don't think any medium of virtual communication interaction has or will replace that.
Yeah, I mean, people love to fetishize about the future of cities and the future of technology, but it tends to be extrapolations upon early ideas that seem really cool. Self-driving vehicles is a great example, right? All of the possibilities when vehicles can drive themselves, what's the blurred line between your house or the house that takes you to wherever else you want to be, is that really a house anymore, et cetera. But to both points, like what we miss often is the fact that we're social beings, right? And so even though technology might temporarily delay or create a disconnect from that aspect of our being, we tend to strive back towards figuring out some way to get back together. And so we don't sort of exercise in predicting exactly what the future of vehicles might be. At Urban Us, we're particularly interested in, well, what are the conditions where we are now and what are the threats to the very basic fundamental needs that we have, which are connection, but also safe air, safe water, food, energy, et cetera. And we let the founders sort of imagine and build the future in their garages.
And so y'all talked about communities earlier, and I want to touch on that. You talk about community in the home. which Brad, I kind of wonder if that's a thing, if people are so portable and are have the opportunity to move around from DC to New York to San Francisco and back again. This seems like kind of an ideal living situation for a certain kind of like millennial tech entrepreneurial guy. And how is this not just like increasing that notion of elitism and sort of jerky gentrification that has turned San Francisco into this like sort of incredibly divided city?
So I don't think flexibility of lease is necessarily a gendered concept. I mean, common is 50-50 gender-wise. Our median age is about 30. And most of, I think under 20% of our members are in the tech industry. So it's kind of represents a wide swath of people. I think, and I think it's to say that wanting to not be tied to a given city, tied to a given lease, is something that would only appeal to people in their 20s in tech. Is a little skewed. I think that is something that is more universally appealing to certainly the generation. We almost look at transferability between homes like the way a lot of other residential developers think about the gym. The gym, a lot of people don't use their building gym. Just the same way a lot of people don't in practice transfer between homes all the time. But people buy housing not necessarily for the person they are, but for the person they believe they will be when they're living in that home. And what being fit was for, perhaps someone leasing an apartment 20 years ago, being able to move seamlessly and not tied down to a place is the equivalent of that today.
We have an extremely diverse community. Our residents, 30% are international. They work in a variety of different fields. We have residents, postdocs, doctors, people who work at nonprofits, and of course, people who work at startups and tech. And we really pride ourselves on our diverse community and what we've created. And we actually find that by putting people together who aren't exactly the same, while at first they may be a little opposed to it, they actually get along better and it creates a stronger bond and community.
Okay, there are different kinds of diversity, right? There's like gender and racial diversity, and then there's economic diversity. Mm-hmm. Like, what is the average income of the folks that are living in y'all's place compared to the average income of like the neighborhoods around them? You know what I mean? Like, is that something that y'all consider or even think about?
Yeah, it absolutely is. I mean, when we think about mitigating the impacts of gentrification, and you kind of have to ask, what does gentrification mean? There's a piece of gentrification. You kind of have to break down this like knot, which is gentrification. And a lot of people say that and mean a lot of different things. One thing they mean is the displacement of existing tenants. And for us, we go in, we only occupy either vacant buildings or more often ground up developments. So new housing stock coming onto the market. And I think there have been some bad players in co-living that haven't followed those rules. The other is actually about kind of displacing local businesses. And making a neighborhood very generic. And one thing we try to do really hard is build relationships between our members and long-standing local businesses, such that they're going to the bodega and not just ordering everything on Fresh Direct.
We also have a pretty diverse range, and for us, community integration is so huge. My co-founder actually lives in one of our HubHouses, and his neighbor brings him pies every week. It's so important, and while a lot of people do have money, and while a lot of people are quite affluent, many folks wouldn't otherwise be able to live in the area if they couldn't live in a shared room, and other shared rooms are a terrible situation. So for them, it's an obvious solution. A one-bedroom apartment is over 50% higher.
I can share a little bit about Star City, which is similar to Common, but Bay Area based. It's a company we invested in, and they absorb part of the community into their units, into their complexes. So, as folks who were already living in the building before, they'll subsidize them to continue to live in that building because they want an economically diverse community. And then another point that I wanted to make, 2 points. One is that an ignored segment and customer segment for co-living is the aging population. The elderly want to be connected as well. The cost of maintaining the aging population in silos is staggeringly higher than giving them the opportunity to stay healthier and happier longer by being connected and sharing that sort of burden of aging together. And then the final point is that, I know we're running out of time.
Don't worry about it.
Okay,
Sorry about this
thanks,
for a little
John.
while. Yeah.
So we're also talking mainly about coastal large cities in these co-living and general urban technologies. But with Mini and BMW and UrbanX is now going around the country and even throughout Europe to find founders. We're doing a tour to search for founders in generally ignored areas of the population. That tour starts tomorrow evening at the UrbanX space in Brooklyn at the ADO.
I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit, right? Because I can see how this can, in fact, drive down costs for people. And Brad, you were saying, like, isn't one of y'all's places in Williamsburg?
It is.
And it's like at least cost competitive and somewhat cheaper given the perks than like renting a place from...
Way cheaper.
Yeah.
I mean, like sub 50% than a studio once you count the perks.
And the value is
Yeah.
so much higher too. I mean, when you live in a normal shared house, you're finding on Craigslist, it's like you're rolling a die. With us, we're a loaded die, and then we have your back and can transfer you to another house if the community's not a good fit, or if your roommate ends up being crazy, or if you just don't get along.
I mean, I think there are problems of like, I would like, how do y'all address the issue of sort of elitism and if you're creating these intentional communities, how do you avoid sort of creating one that's sucky?
Yeah, that's a good question. We're purposely screening for people who we think are open to the community. So when we're looking for people, we will specifically reject people if they're not open-minded, if they're not respectful. If they say, I'm not interested in actually partaking in a community, we tell them, well, then you're probably not a good fit for one of our houses. And most of the time they self-select out too. So they'll stay there for a little bit and then they'll move out. And for us, because community comes first, we will make exceptions. We will allow that to happen, whatever we can do to make the community stronger.
I'm going to have to end it there. Basically what you're saying is that I could never live in a HubHaus. But aside from that, thank y'all so much for participating in the panel. Thank y'all so much for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks, John.